Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show. We're going to try something a little different today, leading with a story that is not COVID-19. Radical, I know, but here we go. I'm going to talk about General Michael Flynn, who pled guilty to lying. But there has been a great deal of, let's say, controversy about this case. The case that the U.S. government brought against him. I'm going to go back 3 days to a piece from The Federalist from Margot Cleveland. Robert Mueller's case against Michael Flynn is about to implode. First, the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia provided Flynn's legal team with documents discovered by an outside review of the Flynn prosecution, documents withheld for years. Then Sidney Powell, the attorney who took over Flynn's defense nearly a year ago, filed new documents in the case revealing a secret lawyer's understanding not to prosecute Flynn's son if the retired lieutenant general pleaded guilty. The criminal case against Flynn began when President Donald Trump's former national security advisor pleaded guilty on December 1st, 2017, to lying to the FBI about conversations he'd had with the Russian ambassador following Trump's election. That case, initiated by the now disbanded special counsel's office, lingered for more than a year while Flynn cooperated with Robert Mueller's team. An end seemed near when Flynn appeared before presiding federal judge Emmett Sullivan on December 18, 2018, for sentencing. But after Sullivan harshly rebuked Flynn and suggested Flynn might spend time in jail, the retired lieutenant general accepted the longtime judge's offer to have the sentencing hearing continued until Flynn's cooperation was complete. Things remained static until Mueller announced on May 29, 2019, that the investigation was complete and that the special counsel's office had been closed. 1 week later, Flynn fired his Covington and Burling lawyers, Robert Kellner and Stephen Anthony, and replaced them with Powell. Powell, a vocal critic of the Mueller investigation, filed a flurry of motions seeking, among other things, documents she maintained the government had improperly withheld. She also sought dismissal of the indictment for prosecutorial misconduct. Sullivan denied Powell's motions and set a new sentencing date of January 28, 2020. But before the hearing date arrived, federal prosecutor Brandon Van Grack, a holdover from the special counsel's office, filed a supplemental sentencing memorandum in the case, reversing the government's position that Flynn was entitled to a sentencing reduction for providing substantial assistance to the prosecutors. Flynn's legal team responded by filing a motion to withdraw the guilty plea, arguing the government breached the plea agreement by pulling its recommendation for a substantial assistance sentencing reduction. Powell filed two more motions to withdraw shortly thereafter, one based on prosecutorial misconduct, and the second based on claims that Flynn's prior Covington attorneys had a non-waivable conflict of interest and provided ineffective assistance of counsel. Sullivan delayed sentencing once more and directed Flynn's former attorney to provide material to the government related to Flynn's ineffective assistance claims. Then came news that Attorney General William Barr had appointed the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Missouri, Jeffrey Jensen, to review the special counsel's handling of the Flynn case. So what we have here was many documents were kept from the defense. And also attached to the filing were two heavily redacted exhibits that consisted of email communications between Flynn's former Covington attorneys. We have a lawyer's unofficial understanding that they are unlikely to charge Junior in light of the cooperation agreement, one email read, referring to Flynn's son, also named Michael Flynn. While alone, that reference may not have raised concerns of misconduct, the second excerpt suggests prosecutors sought to hide evidence from other defendants by keeping the Michael Flynn Jr. part of the deal secret, so as to limit how much of a benefit it would have to disclose as part of its disclosures to any defendant against whom MTF may one day testify, Flynn's attorney wrote. When a defendant cuts a deal with the government and agrees to cooperate and testify against a co-defendant or others, under Giglio, those other defendants are entitled to learn the benefit of the plea agreement. But the email excerpts above suggest, as Powell argued in her latest filing, that the lead prosecutor, Van Grack, made a side deal not to prosecute Michael Flynn Jr. as a material term of the plea agreement, but he required that it be kept secret between himself and the Covington attorneys expressly to avoid the requirement of Giglio. Those emails also distinguish Flynn's case from the run-of-the-mill criminal case in which a defendant seeks to avoid a plea agreement because of a side deal. Courts regularly dismiss such challenges because the terms of the plea agreement expressly provide that there were no other agreements beyond those set forth in the written plea agreement. So, moving ahead, we have from April 29th from Sean Davis at the Federalist. Explosive new Flynn documents show FBI goal was to get him fired. Handwritten notes from the FBI that had been withheld from Michael Flynn and his defense team show that the FBI's goal in investigating and ambushing him was just that, to get him fired. In the handwritten FBI notes, the note taker, whose identity was not made clear in the document production, wrote that an alternative goal is to get Flynn to admit breaking the Logan Act, a reference to a 1799 law restricting communications between private citizens and foreign governments. The law is widely viewed as unconstitutional and has never been used to successfully prosecute a single American citizen. The previously secret notes do not explain that Flynn was not a private citizen, but rather the incoming national security advisor at the time of his conversations with world leaders. Accusations that Flynn was a traitor to his country who violated the 1799 law gained steam following the criminal leak of top-secret information to Washington Post columnist David Ignatius. Ignatius's source suggested the routine conversation between the top incoming White House advisor and his foreign counterparts might be a Logan Act violation. As absurd as the suggestion was, Ignatius dutifully parroted it. News reports indicate U.S. Attorney John Durham is currently investigating the sources of those criminal leaks of top national security information to Ignatius. Although the agents who interviewed Flynn initially stated they believed Flynn told them the truth during the January 24th interview, Special Counsel Robert Mueller nonetheless charged Flynn in late 2017 with making false statements to FBI investigators in the interview. Flynn pleaded guilty to the charge at the time, but is currently trying to withdraw that plea, citing ineffective counsel and government corruption in the conduct of his case. The explosive new documents support Flynn's latest claims that the Obama-era Department of Justice and FBI officials had conspired to set him up from the beginning, and that they never had any legitimate basis for investigating him. So let's recap. You have the incoming national security advisor meets with a Russian official, and how is this in any way untoward? Sean Davis continues, the only Russian collusion that happened during the 2016 campaign was between the Clinton campaign and a subcontractor it funded, who was at the time working on behalf of a sanctioned Russian oligarch. That agent, former British intelligence operative Christopher Steele, created for the Clinton campaign the entire basis for charges of illegal collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. That document, known as the Steele dossier, has been thoroughly debunked since it was first released in early January 2017. The Clinton campaign, in cooperation with the Democratic National Committee, secretly funded the creation of that document and its distribution throughout the media. To date, none of its key collusion claims has been corroborated. The FBI notes also show that the author of the document had misgivings about the FBI's conduct in interviewing Flynn. I agreed yesterday that we shouldn't show Flynn redacted if he didn't admit, the FBI author wrote. I thought about it last night, and I believe we should rethink this. We regularly show subjects evidence with the goal of getting them to admit wrongdoing. I don't see how getting someone to admit their wrongdoing is going easy on him. The handwritten FBI notes end with a prophetic line, giving the voluminous evidence of misconduct by FBI and DOJ officials in their investigation of Trump and their attempt to oust him from office. If we're seen as playing games, the White House will be furious, the author wrote. Protect our institution by not playing games. And today, this is from Breitbart, President Donald Trump predicted at the White House that General Michael Flynn will be exonerated after reports detailed FBI notes showing that agents were trying to trick him into lying to them in an interview. He's in the process of being exonerated. If you look at those notes from yesterday, that was total exoneration. These were dirty, filthy cops at the top of the FBI. Look what they did to the guy. He couldn't have shown too much what was happening. They came at him with 15 buses, and he's standing in the middle of the highway. CNN's Jim Acosta asked Trump about Flynn during a White House Oval Office meeting with New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy. That prompted the president to demand that CNN not only apologize for tormenting the general, but also cover the new documents fairly. Jim, what they did to him is terrible, and I hope that CNN's going to give him a fair shake and cover it. Trump praised Flynn's years of service to the country in the United States military. You don't get to be where he is by being bad, that I can tell you. When asked if he regretted firing Flynn, Trump said he wished he would have had the information about the FBI trying to force him to lie. What they did to General Flynn and others was a disgrace. He's essentially exonerated. Now, that's not official yet, but when you read the notes, how could you do anything else? This is all part of the coup attempt that the Obama-led FBI, DOJ, CIA. First, they tried to wreck Trump's campaign, spying on it, the Steele dossier, and when Trump was elected anyway, they decided not our president, and they were going to force him out by any means necessary. In this case, by a farrago of lies about Russian collusion. And when they couldn't get anywhere with that, a last-minute substitution of the Ukraine for Russia. Here's another story from the Federalist today. Former FBI Director James Comey once bragged about launching an operation to frame former Trump White House National Security Advisor Michael Flynn during a 2018 interview with NBC's Nicole Wallace at a 92nd Street Y conference. You look at this White House now, and it's hard to imagine two FBI agents ending up in the sit room. How did that happen? Wallace asked. I sent them, Comey said plainly, something I probably wouldn't have done or even gotten away with in a more organized investigation, a more organized administration. Comey pointed at previous administrations under Presidents Barack Obama and George W. Bush, where the FBI director would have gone through a series of protocols before interrogating senior staff. In both of those administrations, there was process. So if the FBI wanted to send agents into the White House itself to interview a senior official, you would work through the White House counsel, and there would be discussions and approvals of who would be there. And I thought it's early enough. Let's just send a couple of guys over, Comey said. And so we placed a call to Flynn and said, hey, we're sending a couple of guys over. Hope you'll talk to them. He said, sure. Nobody else was there. They interviewed him in a conference room in the White House Situation Room, and he lied to them. Wallace followed up, asking Comey what he thought Flynn thought the conversation was going to be about. I don't think he knew, Comey said. We didn't tell him. Last fall, a former Comey assistant published a book accusing the FBI chief of abusing his power to flout protocols in order to create a perjury trap for the White House security advisor. We just decided, screw it, Comey said, according to Josh Campbell. While the individual identity of the FBI note-taker is unclear, they wrote that agents were alternatively seeking to indict Flynn on charges for violating the Logan Act, which we have talked about. It's clear now that James Comey will go down in history as the most corrupt FBI director in American history, Davis said on Fox News, joining Laura Ingraham on Wednesday. He has destroyed the FBI's reputation through his actions, his arrogance, and his corruption. So I guess Donald Trump and Bill Barr, the Attorney General, have a very serious decision to make. Is Comey and others, are they going to be prosecuted for what they did? I suppose the fear will be that if this happens, the so-called intelligence community and the like will declare war on Trump, aided and abetted by the media, but they declared war on Trump 4 years ago. So I don't know how it could be any worse than it is now. And let's have a look at the chat, see what's going on there. Ricardo Williams says, Flynn was framed and there isn't a darn thing that anyone is going to do about it. I don't know. We're past the stage of accountability when dealing with law breaking by our government officials. Let's get real. Trump is impotent in the face of this corruption. Josh Randall says Trump's last card is using the military. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there was talk. What, back in 2017? You might remember there was all this sort of, yeah, maybe there should be a military coup. Apparently, the generals are not happy at all with Trump. Apparently, Trump wants peace with Russia, and we can't have that, and he's out of control. And of course, the military has a higher duty. Maybe they'll ramp that up again. Flynn's ability to rise as high as he did in the military means he's probably a bad dude anyway, says Ricardo Williams. Well, I'll tell you, if you read about Flynn, there was a whispering campaign against him in the Obama administration because apparently he didn't want to do things business as usual, and his reputation was largely destroyed by anonymous so-called insiders within the intelligence community. Apparently, my viewership numbers are down. Okay, I'll have to check that. It could be that people are just sick of talking about COVID-19, but essentially, what else is going on? I mean, this is the whole media now. I was talking to someone yesterday, and I said that there's pretty much three stories in the world now, which is we're all going to die. That's story number one. Story two is, well, maybe we're not all going to die. And story three is, how are the celebrities holding up under all this? Josh Randall says we're going to rebuild America more tremendously than before. Well, one certainly hopes so. Metal Mike says permanent state saw Trump as a threat because he was not groomed and controlled by them. The Comte de Boreas says there is nothing more corrupt than the WHO. The mafia boss doesn't even have a medical license. He is he's an Ethiopian communist. John Miller says there is no reason to pardon Flynn. Judge Sullivan should dismiss the case. Of course, you don't talk about prosecutorial misconduct. The case against John Demjanjuk was just chock full of that. But I don't recall anyone being punished in that regard. Glib Medley says, good to hear non-COVID news. Flynn was the guy behind that Afghanistan report that said the war was unwinnable, and that's why they targeted him. Josh Randall says, I'd land a Marine Expeditionary Unit on the front lawn of Langley, frankly, literally and deeply huge. John Miller says, I still want to know how the original 302 was lost. How is that even possible? Yeah, that's a very good question. Of course, the FBI does interviews, and then they write a report. They don't keep any recordings of these interviews. And as we have seen with these Mueller shenanigans, that these reports can later be amended. And I suppose the lesson to this story is don't talk to the FBI ever. People have said it's probably a good idea not to speak to any law enforcement officials ever. Let your lawyer do the talking, and your lawyer, if he's any good at all, will tell you to shut up. Before I talk about the media, there's a breaking story. Hundreds of protesters, some carrying guns, in the state capitol demonstrate against Michigan's emergency measures. Protesters held signs, waved American flags, and even carried firearms as lawmakers debated extending Governor Gretchen Whitmer's state of emergency. And others tried to get into the House floor, but were blocked by state police and sergeants at arms, according to NBC affiliate WDIV of Detroit. A state police spokesman told NBC News that it is legal in Michigan to carry firearms as long as it is done with lawful intent and the weapon is visible. I'm going to make a prediction here. Maybe this will happen, maybe it won't. That we've been told that obviously the United States must become much more like China, because misinformation and disinformation kills people. Well, they're going to connect ownership of guns to COVID-19. can we really have these people who are virus deniers having guns? Won't that kill people? I mean, the liberals, the left, the media, the elite generally, they've all been looking for excuses to gut the Second Amendment, just as they're now currently looking for excuses. Well, they found an excuse in order to gut the First Amendment. And, since it's done by private businesses, well, of course, then it's perfectly all right. Senator Dana Polahanki tweets directly above me, men with rifles yelling at us. Some of my colleagues who own bulletproof vests are wearing them. I have never appreciated our Sergeant at Arms more than today. I recall that when the Oklahoma City bomber, when he was indicted, his formal indictment, one of the counts in the indictment was that he was found in possession of literature by Samuel Adams and Thomas Jefferson. And this was reported, and I thought, that can't possibly be true, because aren't Samuel Adams and Thomas Jefferson American heroes? And then I actually got a hold of a copy of the indictment. And yes, that was part of it. Let's see, a tweet from Leon Hendricks. Officers took protesters' temperatures as they entered the Capitol building in Lansing. Perhaps no one will be allowed to go anywhere without their temperature being taken. Or perhaps the drones will just, look up, and the drones will take our temperature and then send a message as to whether, we're allowed to leave or go anywhere in the future. There's a long piece by Matt Taibbi on Substack, and he is railing against not the sanitary dictatorship per se, but the new normal. And in the new normal, free speech is not a good thing. It is a bad thing. Earlier this week, he writes, Atlantic Magazine, fast becoming the favored media outlet for self-styled intellectual elites of the Aspen Institute type, ran an in-depth article of the problems free speech posed to American society in the coronavirus era. The headline, Internet speech will never go back to normal. In the debate over freedom versus control of the global network, China was largely correct and the US was wrong. Authored by a pair of law professors from Harvard and the University of Arizona, the piece argued that the American and Chinese approaches to monitoring the Internet were already not that dissimilar. They went on to list all the reasons that, given we're already on an inexorable path to censorship, a Chinese-style system of speech control may not be such a bad thing. In fact, they argued a benefit of the coronavirus was that it was waking us up to how technical wizardry, data centralization, and private-public collaboration can do enormous public good. Perhaps, they posited, Americans could be moved to reconsider their understanding of the First and Fourth Amendments as the harms from digital speech continue to grow and the social costs of a relatively open internet multiply. This interesting take on the First Amendment was the latest in a line of let's rethink that whole democracy thing that began sprouting up in earnest 4 years ago. Articles with headlines like democracies end when they become too democratic, and too much of a good thing, why we need less democracy, became common after two events in particular, Donald Trump's victory in the Republican primary race and the decision by British voters to opt out of the EU, i.e. Brexit. A consistent lament in these pieces was the widespread decline in respect for experts among the ignorant masses, better known as the people Trump was talking about when he gushed in February 2016, I love the poorly educated. The Atlantic was at the forefront of the argument that the people is a great beast, one that cannot be trusted to play responsibly with the toys of freedom. A 2016 piece called American Politics Has Gone Insane pushed a return of the smoke-filled room to help save voters from themselves. Author Jonathan Rauch employed a metaphor that is striking in retrospect, describing America's oft-vilified intellectual and political elite as society's immune system. Quote, Americans have been busy demonizing and disempowering political professionals and parties, which is like spending decades abusing and attacking your own immune system. Eventually, you will get sick, unquote. You know, when medical metaphors start being used in this way, it's very Soviet. You know that something bad is going to happen. The new piece by Goldsmith and Wood says, we're there, made literally sick by our refusal to accept the wisdom of experts. The time for asking again, literally, the unwashed to listen harder to their betters is over. The Chinese system offers a way out when it comes to speech. Don't ask, tell. And then he goes on to talk about the video by Drs. Dan Erickson and Artin Masihi, the co-owners of an urgent care clinic in Bakersfield, California. That is to say, Matt Taibbi, is not too keen on the arguments made by these doctors, but queries the severe reaction of the medical community. The message boards of real ER doctors lit up with angry comments, scoffing at the doctors' dubious at best data collection methods. And yes, these are not official experts, so they can't be allowed to speak. So Tucker Carlson defended the doctors, and Taibbi writes, meanwhile, over on Carlson's opposite number channel, MSNBC, anchor Chris Hayes of the All In program reacted with fury to Carlson's monologue, quote, there's a concerted effort on the part of influential people at the network that we at All In call Trump TV right now to peddle dangerous misinformation, there's that word again, about the coronavirus. Call it coronavirus trutherism. Hayes, an old acquaintance of mine, seized at what he characterized as the gross indifference of Trump Republicans to the dangers of coronavirus. At the beginning of this horrible period, the president, along with his lackeys and propagandists, they all minimized what was coming, he said, sneering. They said it was just like a cold or the flu. He angrily demanded that if Fox acolytes like Carlson believed so strongly that society should be reopened, they should go work in a meat processing plant. Get in there if you think it's that bad. Go chop up some pork. Yeah, let's send political dissidents to camps. An interesting development. The tone of many of the media reactions to Erickson, Carlson, Trump, Georgia Governor Brian Kemp, and others who've suggested lockdowns and strict shelter-in-place laws are either unnecessary or do more harm than good fits in with what writer Thomas Frank describes as a new utopia of scolding. Who needs to win elections when you can personally reestablish the social order every day on Twitter and Facebook? When you can scold and scold and scold. That's their future, and it's a satisfying one. A finger wagging in some vulgar proletarian's face forever. In the Trump years, the sector of society we used to describe as liberal America became a giant finger-wagging machine. The news media, academia, the Democratic Party, show business celebrities, and masses of blue-check Twitter virtuosos became a kind of umbrella agreement society, united by loathing of Trump and fury toward anyone who dissented with their preoccupations. Yes, the Atlantic headline on Kemp's decision to end some shutdowns was Georgia's experiment in human sacrifice. At the outset of the crisis, America's biggest internet platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Google, LinkedIn, and Reddit, took an unprecedented step to combat fraud and, wait for it, misinformation by promising extensive cooperation in elevating authoritative news over less reputable sources. And then Taibbi goes on to explain how journalism works, what reporters do. And I can testify from my own lengthy experience that what he says is absolutely correct. I remember coming across accidentally pieces that I had written sometime before, and I didn't remember writing the piece, and apparently I knew something about this subject. Apparently I had opinions on this subject. I had completely forgotten it. Taibbi writes, journalists are professional test grammars. Our job is to get an assignment on Monday morning, and by Tuesday evening or Wednesday morning, act like we're authorities on intellectual piracy, the civil war in Yemen, Iowa caucus procedure, the coronavirus, whatever. We actually know jack. We speed read, make a few phone calls, and in a snap, people are inviting us on television to tell millions of people what to think about the complex issues of the world. When we come to a subject cold, the job is about consulting as many people who really know their stuff as quickly as possible and sussing out, often based on nothing more than hunches or impressions of the personality involved, which set of explanations is most believable. Sports writers who covered the Deflategate football scandal had to do this in order to explain the ideal gas law. I had to do it to cover the subprime mortgage scandal, and reporters this past January and February had to do it when assigned to assess the coming coronavirus threat. It does not take that much work to go back and find that a significant portion of the medical and epidemiological establishment called this disaster wrong when they were polled by reporters back in the beginning of the year. Right-wingers are having a blast collecting the headlines, and they should, given the chest pounding at places like MSNBC about others who minimize the risk. Here's a brief sample. From the Washington Post, get a grip, spelled G-R-I-P-P-E. Get a grip, America. The flu is a much bigger threat than coronavirus for now. From USA Today, coronavirus is scary, but the flu is deadlier, more widespread. From Time, want to protect yourself from coronavirus? Do the same things you do every winter. And here's my personal favorite from Wired on January 29th. We should de-escalate the war on coronavirus. There are dozens of these stories, and they nearly all contain the same elements, including an inevitable quote or series of quotes from experts telling us to calm the hell down. This is from the Time piece. Good hand washing helps. Staying healthy and eating healthy will also help, says Dr. Sharon Nachman, a pediatric infectious disease specialist at New York's Stony Brook Children's Hospital. The things we take for granted actually do work. It doesn't matter what the virus is, the routine things work. There's a reason why journalists should always keep their distance from priesthoods in any field. It's particularly in the nature of insular communities of subject matter experts to coalesce around orthodoxies that blind the very people in the loop who should be the most knowledgeable. Experts get things wrong for reasons that are innocent. They've all been taught the same incorrect thing in school, or less so. They have a financial or professional interest in denying the truth. On the less nefarious side, the entire community of pollsters in 2016 denounced as infamous the idea that Donald Trump could win the Republican nomination, let alone the general election. They believed that because they weren't paying attention, but also because they'd never seen anything similar. In a more suspicious example, if you asked 100 Wall Street analysts in September 2008 what caused the financial crisis, probably no more than a handful would have mentioned fraud or malfeasance. And of course, if you remember, before 2008, before 2007, when there was talk about a housing bubble, all of the experts rushed forward to say no. There was no such thing in the United States as a housing bubble, that it was entirely healthy. And what's wrong with rising house prices? They benefit home owners. Things are good and can only get better. Tabby continues, the weapons of mass destruction fiasco happened because journalists listened to people with military ranks and titles instead of demanding evidence and listening to their own instincts. The same thing happened with Russiagate, a story fueled by intelligence experts with grand titles who are now proven to have been wrong to a spectacular degree, if not actually criminally liable in pushing a fraud. We become incapable of talking calmly about possible solutions because we've lost the ability to decouple scientific or policy discussions or simple issues of fact from a political argument. Reporting on the COVID-19 crisis has become the latest in a line of moral manias with Donald Trump in the middle. And he concludes, we do actually have to talk about this. We can't not talk about it for fear of being censored or because we're confusing real harm with political harm. Turning ourselves into China for any reason is the definition of a cure being worse than the disease. The scolders who are being seduced by such thinking have to wake up before we end up adding another disaster on top of the terrible one we're already facing. And at the Monterey Peninsula College, they're asking the question, why are so many journalists such terrible people? And I was pointed to a piece from the website Mindfully Healing, which professions have the most psychopaths? Here are some of the traits of psychopaths: self-confident, cold-hearted, manipulative, fearless, charming, cool under pressure, egocentric, carefree. And the professions with the most psychopaths, according to a survey conducted by psychologist Kevin Dutton called the Great British Psychopath Survey: 1 CEO, 2 lawyer, 3 media, TV and radio, 4 salesperson, 5 surgeon, 6 journalist, 7 police officer, 8 clergy person, 9 chef, and 10 civil servant. Just the fake news just continues. That apparently Donald Trump's staff, his campaign advisors, they all hate his guts. They all think he's a lunatic. Really? Do they now? A story from CNN, which is the first name in fake news. As he huddled with advisors on Friday evening, President Donald Trump was still fuming over sliding poll numbers and the onslaught of criticism he was facing for suggesting a day earlier that injecting disinfectant might prove effective against coronavirus. So let's start with a lie in the very first paragraph. Within moments, the president was shouting, not at the aides in the room, but into the phone at his campaign manager, Brad Parscale. 3 people familiar with the matter told CNN. Shifting the blame away from himself, Trump berated Parscale for a recent spate of damaging poll numbers, and even at one point threatening to sue him. It's not clear how serious the president's threat of a lawsuit was. Trump defended Parscale in a tweet on Thursday, writing, "Actually, he's doing a great job. I never shouted at him. Been with me for years, including the 2016 win, and have no intention to do so." Okay, so who are you going to believe here? CNN has lied again and again and again about every aspect of Donald Trump's life, his campaign, his presidency. And they keep doing it because that's what they do. Here's another example. This is from the mysterious website that Matt Drudge likes to link to, DNYUZ. Trump officials are said to press spies to link virus and Wuhan labs. Senior Trump administration officials have pushed American spy agencies to hunt for evidence to support an unsubstantiated theory that a government laboratory in Wuhan, China, was the origin of the coronavirus outbreak, according to current and former American officials. The effort comes as President Trump escalates a public campaign to blame China for the pandemic. Most intelligence agencies remain skeptical that conclusive evidence of a link to the lab can be found. Conclusive evidence of a link to the lab is not quite the same as talking about, a bonkers conspiracy theory. Those are very, very different. So let's see. Is there anything in this story about the visit of U.S. consular officials to the lab in Wuhan? Because that's the test, That is the test. No. No, there is not. No, there is not. Okay, so, top coronavirus model predicts 100,000 Americans dead by the end of this summer's first wave, as death toll passes Trump's best case scenario of 60,000 dead. The MOBS model from the Network Science Institute at Northeastern University predicts that 100,000 Americans will have died from COVID-19 by the end of summer. It also estimates there will be about 89,000 deaths by mid-May if stay-at-home orders remain in place. But I thought the whole point of the stay-at-home orders was to stop people from dying. Now, this sanitary dictatorship, as Bishop Athanasius Schneider has called it, has always been implicitly a sadistic. Now it has become explicitly sadistic. Ottawa Mayor orders end to ban on window visits in city nursing homes. Ottawa Mayor Jim Watson says he's ordered the people who run the city's nursing homes to find a way to let family visitors visit residents through windows again. The 4 municipal homes administrators told families to stop coming to their grounds in letters sent out this week, saying there had been incidents of outdoor visitors not observing distancing rules meant to protect residents from COVID-19. And of course, next they're going to be telling us that the COVID-19 virus can leap through glass. Perhaps it can leap through walls as well. The instruction prompted a furor from families who haven't been allowed in to visit their relatives in weeks, as well as from city councillors. It also prompted an impassioned response from Ontario Premier Doug Ford, whose family has been visiting his own mother-in-law, who tested positive for COVID-19 in this way. Expect massive protests, reads MarketWatch. Gavin Newsom catches heat ahead of expected beach closures in California. Yes, Gavin Newsom is going to close all the beaches, and apparently he's going to close the state parks as well. Because we all have to be miserable. We all have to be miserable. And let's check out the situation. California has, what, 37 million people? And they have 1,982 deaths. So, let's close everything, because apparently some people are not taking this seriously enough. A story, more sadism news. The Premier of Alberta, my old friend Jason Kenney, is a convert to Roman Catholicism. Nonetheless, Alberta bans singing in church to prevent spread of COVID-19. Alberta's United Conservative government has followed a California county and banned singing during live-stream church services, which are restricted to fewer than 15 people, allegedly to stop the spread of the coronavirus. Any gatherings with fewer than 15 people must not include activities that could promote disease transmission, reads a March 24th Alberta government advisory on restrictions on gathering. This includes singing, even at religious gatherings, as infected people can transmit the virus through their saliva or respiratory droplets while singing. Other activities considered high risk include, but are not limited to, cheering, handshaking, preparing food, sharing food or beverages, and buffet-style meals. The penalty for violating the order is a fine that can range from $1,000 to $100,000 for a first offense, and up to $500,000 for a subsequent offense for more serious violations. As the directive is worded, a priest singing the Mass in the presence of a single camera person and observing the required social distance would be in violation of the law and subject to fines between $1,000 and $100,000. But according to an individual who spoke to LifeSite News, but wished to remain anonymous, local churches are continuing to sing during their live-streamed worship services. I wonder if Premier Kenney is going to send his goons in to drag priests, ministers, choir members out of their churches. Yes, and what's the old saying? What is permitted to Jove is not permitted to a cow. Illinois Governor Pritzker, it's inappropriate to ask if my wife dodged my stay-at-home order. In response to reports that his billionaire spouse, M.K. Pritzker, left town, effectively dodging the state's stringent stay-at-home orders by purportedly fleeing to their $12.1 million equestrian estate in South Florida. Pritzker recently extended the stay-at-home order until May 30th as he continues to promote the All in Illinois initiative, encouraging residents by letting them know that we're all in this together. However, according to a report from The Patch, the state's first lady is not all in, and she reportedly fled to South Florida as millions of Illinoisans find themselves unable to return to work as a result of her husband's order. He called it inappropriate in a Wednesday press briefing and stated that it was reprehensible that the Patch reporter originally covered the story. Where's the First Lady? Is she accompanied by a state security detail? Has she engaged in non-essential travel? What is your response to people who say that the stay-home order and non-essential travel bans aren't being abided by your family? He was asked. Pritzker responded, I want to say that in politics it used to be that we kept our families out of it, but wait a minute, I thought we were all in it together. Oh, here's an interesting story from Joel Pollack in Breitbart. New evidence, FBI wanted to drop case against Michael Flynn until Peter Strzok intervened. You might remember Peter Strzok. He was the one making the very strange faces when he was testifying. They call it gurning in England. Kyle Cheney tweets, new Flynn documents show the FBI had drafted a document to formally close the case against him, but 20 minutes after it circulated, Strzok and other agents put the brakes on it. Gerald Nadler, you might remember him as one of the clowns directing the impeachment circus in Washington. He is a Democrat from the state of New York. He said that thousands more people will die if Trump is successful in his attempt at reopening the economy so it can rebound for his election. Because that's the only reason that Trump would want to reopen the economy, so that he can get reelected. I mean, the suggestion there is that Trump has no interest in people, not having jobs, not having money, losing their houses, being made homeless, committing suicide, and all the rest of it. Well, obviously, he has an interest in this. One would have to be, a psychopath not to have an interest in it. But one very much gets the impression that the elite opinion is the lockdown must last forever. Well, of course, free speech is to be sacrificed, and the more people that are dead, however those numbers are obtained, the better. From the London Independent, police are trying to find a person who dresses as a 17th century plague doctor on their walks during the coronavirus outbreak. Residents in a Norwich suburb have spotted someone strolling around in a long black cloak, hat, and pointed beak-like mask over the past few weeks. They posted on a community Facebook page claiming the outfit could scare children, according to a BBC report. Jade Gosbell, who took a photo of the person walking across a recreation ground in Helsdon, said she saw them wearing a full black suit on a sunny 20 degrees Celsius day. She said she was worried her mother, who has a phobia of masks, would bump into them. Well, if her mother has a phobia of masks, I guess she better not leave the house or even look outside. Let's see, Neil Pollock, who styles himself the greatest living American writer, writes, as I gaze upon the devastated valley below the balcony of my Mount Winchester estate, eating the last chicken wing that my beleaguered manservant Roger was able to scrounge at our depleted local Costco, I mourn for the America we've lost. When the COVID-19 crisis first began, I thought it might last 2 weeks, 3 tops. But now, as the long misery kicks in, it's become apparent to me that we live in the worst time, in the worst country in the history of the world. Nothing can redeem us. Waves of sickness will wash over the population for the next 2 years as everything we love vanishes in a tide of despair. Through my research and my observation of Twitter, I must conclude we live in a failed state, a failed country, and most likely a failed city as well. This is the darkest timeline. You must not let anyone tell you otherwise. Seemingly rational people cannot persuade you that things are going to be the way they were before the crisis began. Elements of society that you once loved, such as wrestling, baseball, movies, walking outside, and food, are gone forever. What replaces them is up to us, or more accurately, our governors. As this disease weakens us, it also strengthens us. As it pulls us apart, it also brings us together. We must all learn what it is like to eat disinfected cardboard, soaked in a little soy sauce, and to live in perpetual fear of people who look happy. Because of our lax government response to the disease and the lack of antibody tests that may or may not be accurate, this is the reality in which we live. We must isolate the tested test the isolated, and stun children at the playground with laser drones. None of that should cause you to despair. Now is the time for you to be prepared, along with all of us together. We must be steadfast and brave, and bravery means staying at home. If you do one thing wrong during this pandemic, you will die. Eating food from a restaurant will kill you immediately. If you see someone with whom you don't live, you will increase your chances of dying by 70%. And if you bring food home that you don't grow yourself, you must automatically douse it in chemicals. But don't inject those chemicals, or you will die. I personally know 3 people who have died and 3 more people who know someone who's died. My editor died, albeit in 2008. I myself have already died twice. Joyce Carol Oates has not died and never will. My beleaguered manservant, Roger, was so sick he couldn't cook for me for nearly 18 days. That was almost the greatest tragedy of all. I am an important person, the greatest living American writer, and I just want you all to understand what I've said today. There are reasons for hope, also no reasons for hope. This is my message for you. Piece from Ian Davis at the Off Guardian. A new public health crisis, very recently identified as Lock-in 20, is raising increasing health concerns in the UK. In their response to a respiratory illness called COVID-19, the UK state are among those who have responded by locking up their populations, destroying their own national economy. This appears to be causing Lock-in 20. The most recent statistics from the UK's Office of National Statistics raise significant concerns about health impact of the lockdown regimes favored by some, but not all governments, all in response to a disease which researchers at the Centre for Evidence-Based Medicine at Oxford University estimate to have an infection fatality rate of between 0.1% and 0.36%, similar to seasonal flu. Of course, a syndrome called Lock-in 20 hasn't been identified as a cause of death. However, in light of the current data, this post asks if it should. Both Public Health England and the Advisory Committee on Dangerous Pathogens were satisfied that COVID-19 presented a low risk of mortality and downgraded it from the status of high-consequence infectious disease on March the 19th. The ACDP board members include Professor Neil Ferguson from Imperial College. Presumably, Ferguson was among the dissenting voices on the ACDP board as he completely ignored the majority opinion of his scientific colleagues. When it comes to wildly inaccurate predictions, Professor Ferguson's work at Imperial College has a long and distinguished history. In 2002, he said that 50,000 people in the UK would die from mad cow disease. To date, less than 200 have passed away. He predicted 200 million global deaths from the H5N1 bird flu. Currently, it is a suspected factor in the deaths of 455 people worldwide. In 2009, he told the UK government that 65,000 would die from swine flu in the UK and worked with the World Health Organization to predict millions of deaths from the H1N1 global flu pandemic. Suspected resultant UK deaths from swine flu were estimated to be 457, and the global total showed 18,500 laboratory-confirmed deaths from the H1N1 pandemic. The US Center for Disease Control claimed there were many more, though their estimate varies between 150,000 and 500,000. Quite an error margin, and still considerably less than Imperial College's fantasy. The CDC is heavily funded by flu vaccine manufacturers. While Professor Ferguson and his Imperial College colleagues have been consistently wrong, they have also been unquestioningly believed by governments and intergovernmental bodies on every occasion, seemingly without reservation. Despite the clear evidence to the contrary, policymakers from all political parties have shown tremendous loyalty to Imperial College's silly data models. In doing so, they have not only ignored the researchers' woeful history of failed predictions, but have also denied the scientific evidence which usually contradicts them. In no way can basing policy decisions on Imperial College's computer models be considered science-led decision-making, quite the opposite. From Mental Health Today, Suicide Crisis Center shares evidence of lockdown increase in service user suicidality. Let's see, I run a suicide crisis center where we're witnessing firsthand the impact of the lockdown on people's mental health and suicide risk. We have also noted a marked increase in people expressing thoughts of self-harm, even when they have not had such thoughts for years. It may be partly of the way in which the COVID-19 case is being presented as a warlike situation. Well, okay, if you're going to classify people as non-essential, you don't have a job anymore, you can't leave the house, and how long is this going to last for? Maybe forever. Yes, of course you're going to get a huge spike in suicides. Okay, let's go back to the chat. I saw that Portland, Oregon has food pickup sites featuring strippers and poles, says Glib Medley. Chad Chadson, our moderator, says KMG could do a movie night on entropy, play any old movie he likes. I think that would be great. Movie night on entropy, okay. Let's see. Lamprey Milt says, KMG, do you think we are trying to detangle from China or immerse ourselves further with them? Woke capital for Han people. Take a look at the reversal of the Taiwan referendum last November on gay marriage. Well, obviously, our elite wants closer and closer connections with China. This is not a popular view, but of course, we have been told from everyone, you know, from those professors at the Atlantic magazine to Major Tom Nichols, that ordinary people are stupid, and flyover people are stupid, and flyover people should have no say. Flyover people are not too keen on China. So I suppose the question is whether they're going to be listened to or not. This is another story from LifeSite. It originally comes from Le Figaro. That day, world-renowned political philosophers raising the alarm that government authorities could be using the health emergency brought on by the coronavirus to establish a permanent state of emergency, where personal freedoms enjoyed just a few weeks ago are simply erased. Pierre Manent noted how authorities are using the most primitive and brutal of measures in response to COVID-19, namely general confinement under police surveillance. He admitted that in an emergency, some unusual measures are unavoidable. However, he cautioned that basing emergency measures solely on the fragility of human health could provide the state with a permanent justification for a permanent state of emergency, given the permanent urgency of health questions. The decisions of governments across the globe to essentially prohibit funerals of loved ones, Manet said, necessarily follow the erasure of religion. He asked, have you noticed that on the long list of authorized reasons for leaving one's domicile, the needs of pets were not forgotten, but there was no provision for those who might wish to go to a place of worship. Those who govern us are honorable people who are doing their best to overcome a serious crisis, but they have not noticed the enormous and inadmissible abuse of power implicit in some of their decisions. How is this possible? It is time to wake up. Innocent or benign missteps are punished with exorbitant fines. We are forbidden from leaving our residences without passports, but the reestablishment of national borders is still considered a mortal sin. He pointed out that recently we note the return of the least likable features of our state. Nevertheless, even though the state had taken away many freedoms amid the coronavirus pandemic, Manet said, we gave ourselves over to the state long ago, according it sovereignty over our lives. Prior to political developments in recent months, people's lives had already been heavily influenced, often subtly, by the power of the state. Manet explained, specifically referring to freedom of speech. The spontaneity of public speech has been subjected to a kind of prior censorship, which in effect has excluded legitimate debate on most of the important questions of our common life, or even of our personal lives. Whether the question is migration or relations between the sexes and related social questions, an ideology common to society and the state dictates what is permitted and prohibited, which is the same as what is honorable and shameful, noble and vile. In a word, we have altogether internalized the principle of a code of speech and expression, which is considered suspect to resist. Now, you see, for years, people, the woke people, SJWs and their allies, have been trying to prohibit free speech on the basis that free speech sometimes makes people feel bad. That was not sufficient. So the new argument, which is really kind of a genius argument, is that free speech must be prohibited because it literally kills people. Misinformation, this is what we're talking about. That's not free speech, that's misinformation. Well, who decides what the true information is? Well, they do. So if you say, for instance, that the coronavirus is not as dangerous as the models are telling us, you are literally killing people. If you advertise for rallies against lockdowns, well, you are literally killing people. Apparently, even singing in church is killing people. It's a tweet from Alex Berenson. Colorado Health Department reclassifies nursing home deaths as coronavirus. This is from CBS 4 Denver. The Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment has reclassified 3 deaths at a Centennial nursing home as COVID-19 deaths, despite the fact attending physicians ruled all 3 were not related to coronavirus, according to a CBS 4 investigation. The deaths occurred at Summer and Glen, a senior living community with about 200 residents who received various levels of care. Tim Rogers, executive director at the facility, wrote that in mid-April, we were informed of their intention to override some of our physicians' rulings and reclassify some resident passings we have experienced in the last few weeks. Yeah, they're just going to manufacture the numbers. We can get it up to 100,000. You know, they're going to be classifying, gunshot deaths and, people run over by cars as COVID-19 deaths. There's about 2.8 million people die in the United States every year. And if you keep reclassifying deaths as COVID-19 deaths, you can get that number up. Well, I suppose the theoretical limit would be 2.8 million. So Toby Young writes from England in the Lockdown Skeptics. The Times leads with the news that remdesivir may be an effective treatment for COVID-19. Yesterday, oh boy, here he is again, Dr. Anthony Fauci announced the results of a gold standard trial showing the drug has a clear-cut, significant positive effect in diminishing the time to recovery. In a trial run by the U.S. National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases involving 1,063 patients in hospitals around the world, the duration of symptoms was cut from 15 days to 11. The news sent the share price of remdesivir, an antiviral originally designed to combat Ebola, through the roof. The Telegraph's front page has bad news, by contrast. The above the fold headline reads, Johnson to dash lockdown hopes. Another reason Boris is intending to keep the lockdown in place for the foreseeable future, according to the Telegraph, is the news that Germany's transmission rate has gone up since the lockdown was eased last week. At yesterday's Downing Street briefing, Dominic Raab cited this as evidence that a second peak was a very real risk if we scaled back the restrictions. And Chancellor Merkel has made it clear, well, I guess that's the final word on that. Is the infection rate in Germany actually rising? That's a possibility skeptics need to take seriously, because if it is, that would suggest lockdowns are effective at suppressing infection, but it isn't, at least not anymore. On Tuesday, Germany's Robert Koch Institute announced that the reproduction number, RO, for Monday had risen to 1 after having been as low as 0.7 in mid-April, although Lothar Wieler, the RKI's president, later clarified that in fact it had risen to 0.96. However, the latest data shows that it has fallen again to 0.75. And yeah, you can just say anything as long as it's part of the disaster narrative. The blog Facts for EU has published a post on Tuesday's ONS data pointing out that COVID-19 is only likely to kill a fraction of the people killed by other diseases this year, such as cancer, Alzheimer's, and ischemic heart disease. It also unearthed this gem from the ONS's website, in which it explains that its definition of death involving COVID-19 encompasses those cases where COVID-19 or suspected COVID-19 was mentioned anywhere on the death certificate, including in combination with other health conditions. If a death certificate mentions COVID-19, it will not always be the main cause of death, but may be a contributory factor. So there you have it. The ONS records a death as being from COVID-19, even if it's not the main cause of death. No doubt we can look forward to another clamor about the discrepancy between the ONS's figures and those of the government. Now, he mentions something which is going on, which is very disturbing, that doctors in care homes are being, pushed. COVID-19 is responsible for every death, and that people familiar with the cases say, no, this is not the case. He, in terms of reporting of COVID-19, he references Michael Crichton, who was a best-selling author and a very intelligent man. Some readers with a background in medicine or statistics may be shocked at just how poor their daily paper's coverage of the crisis has been. But do they then turn to other parts of the paper and take everything else they're reading as gospel? If so, they're suffering from what Crichton called the Gell-Mann amnesia effect. Briefly stated, Crichton wrote, the Gell-Mann amnesia effect is as follows. You open the newspaper to an article on some subject you know well. In Murray's case, physics. In mine, show business. You read the article and see the journalist has absolutely no understanding of either the facts or the issues. Often the article is so wrong that it actually presents the story backward, reversing cause and effect. I call these the wet streets cause rain stories. Paper's full of them. In any case, you read with exasperation or amusement the multiple errors in a story and then turn the page to national or international affairs and read as if the rest of the newspaper was somehow more accurate about Palestine than the baloney you just read. You turn the page and forget what you know. Now, the World Health Organization, are they having a laugh at our expense? The WHO lauds lockdown ignoring Sweden as a model for countries going forward. Dr. Mike Ryan, the WHO's top emergencies expert, said Wednesday there are lessons to be learned from the Scandinavian nation, which has largely relied on citizens to self-regulate. I think there's a perception out that Sweden has not put in control measures and has just allowed the disease to spread. Nothing could be further from the truth. What it has done differently is it has very much relied on its relationship with its citizenry and the ability and willingness of its citizens to implement self-distancing and self-regulate. Donald Trump had a tweet where he condemned Sweden for their policy, and again, President Trump should have stuck with his initial insight into this. He was right the first time around, but people are saying, why would he be attacking Sweden? Well, as the old saying has it, in for a penny, in for a pound. He could have started opening the country up earlier. I mean, it was suggested he initially wanted to do this by Easter Sunday, and then he flinched. He was bullied into following the advice of experts. And the UK Administrative Justice Institute has a long essay, The Emperor Has No Clothes, a sober analysis of the government response to COVID-19. Trending in the United Kingdom, police state. A death is a death is a death, right? The crude mortality rate in the UK, CMR, is the broadest measure of the total number of deaths from all causes in a given population over a specific time period and is defined as total deaths per 1,000 population. Alternatively, the case fatality rate, CFR, is most often cited. Various subsets can be made using either age, gender, or causal variables. In the context of an epidemic, the CFR measures death rates in a population among diagnosed cases. This is important because CFR offers a picture of useful data for preparation of responsive services, such as acute emergency care services. Importantly, however, the infection fatality rate, IFR, also known as the true case fatality rate, is much more useful. This is because it helps to account for all cases of infection, including asymptomatic infections in the wider population. The World Health Organization tends to publish its fatality estimates using CFR. However, as shown, this is a method of measurement that targets those who seek emergency assistance and have been tested as a result of seeking emergency care. Thus, in countries where widespread testing is not instituted, such as the UK, CFR is misleading. This clearly amounts to a form of selection bias. Now, as Alex Marinson has pointed out, in the United States, okay, get those testing kits out there. Okay, that's been done. Not very many people seem to want to get tested. I suppose it's because, no news is good news. But on the other hand, this suggests very strongly that there are far fewer sicker people than we have been led to believe. The author of this study concludes the consequences of prolonged lockdown are serious, and I have absolutely no doubt that the human cost of these measures across the world will be so immense as to completely overshadow any perceived and debatable benefits of enforced lockdown. As Dr. John Lee has suggested, the moral debate is not lives versus money, it is lives versus lives. Lives versus lives. As a society, we must remain aware of the ever-present dangers and risks of being led by small groups of influential scientists. Lasky once said, we must ceaselessly remember that no body of experts is wise enough or good enough to be charged with the destiny of mankind. Scientific understanding is not the sole possession of a single individual or set of individuals. It is distributed, and its locus is at the population level. This locus is a non-negotiable principle of any democracy worth its salt, and we would do well to remember it. If the evidence for risk to life is as problematic as it appears, it follows that the case for enforced quarantine and lockdown is increasingly hard to justify. If needlessly maintained, it could be noted as one of the greatest errors of political judgment and decision-making in modern history. There is nothing virtuous in following a flawed narrative. It is deleterious to our national well-being and dangerous for the preservation of our British values, democratic norms, and way of life. The question remains, who dares to doubt whether the emperor has any clothes? Okay, so the numbers are being juiced in order to justify the lockdown. But if the numbers continue to rise, if the juice numbers continue to rise, in the United States, say topping 100,000, then people are going to say, wait, this lockdown is not doing any good. This is an even bigger question in Britain, where the lockdown is almost total. So what is the government going to do then? If it appears that the lockdown has had no effect, well, I suspect they're going to, as they did in the Soviet Union when things went wrong, they talked about wreckers, that we're going to be alerted to these people who are flouting the lockdown, flouting the quarantine. That person you saw walking to the park yesterday, these people are responsible for tens of thousands of deaths, and these people must be rooted out, hunted down, and dealt with. And William Briggs, who I've quoted on this program many times, he is an adjunct professor of statistics at Cornell University, and he talks about the daily deaths or the weekly deaths in England and Wales, historical figures, and you see spikes, spike up, spike down, spike up, spike down. I mean, it's like this. And as far as how deadly coronavirus is, coronavirus doesn't look like it will be the equivalent body count, which infection killed the most people. That honor goes to the 1999 to 2000 flu. The silver goes to the 1998 to 1999 flu year. Best Corona could do was the bronze. Can't fault its effort, though. Now, one really has to ask, flu epidemics have come and gone in the past. Some of them took a great many lives. But there was no hysterical response. Why is this different? I mean, what is different about it? There is nothing different about it as far as I can see, except perhaps that the power of the matriarchy or the gynocracy has become greater. But again, going back to what Matt Taibbi wrote, our elite is increasingly fed up with the people it nominally serves. That these people have become, antsy, and Britons voted to leave the European Union, and voters elected Donald Trump. I mean, apparently these people are capable of anything, and increasing numbers of people are saying that globalism is a bad thing, and it must be attenuated, if not ended completely. So this is an opportunity for us to seize control. There's the alternative hypothesis, which I ventured the other day, that China realized that its efforts to stonewall what was happening in Wuhan and elsewhere were failing. So they and the World Health Organization, they turned on a dime and insisted that everyone was going to die unless everyone was locked down. And oh, by the way, all those freedoms you used to enjoy, they're gone now. Piece by Ryan Kemper on the case for ending lockdown. He writes, so if a policy of containment is truly such a bad idea, how did our public health officials, some of whom have decades of battle-tested experience, get it so wrong? Hanlon's razor is very relevant here. We think it is not reasonable to assume that they were trying to usher in a techno-totalitarian state. Rather, they were trying to prevent mortality, but their incentive structure is such that it is much worse to have done nothing and later find out the virus was worse than we thought, than what actually happened, which is to have undertaken actions that were self-destructive and then discovered that the virus was way less deadly than we thought. Additionally, an environment of incredible stress and sleeplessness is known to destroy cognitive functioning. In particular, it shifts the human brain from a cognitive style that can think strategically and proactively avoid problems to one that experiences tunnel vision and a rigidity in belief systems. That is to say that the conditions our well-intentioned officials have been operating under have put them physiologically in a state that makes it hard for any human to adequately process the torrent of incoming data and synthesize it into effective public policy. I've seen this in myself and in others, people that I've worked with. Oh, yeah, putting in those 18-hour days, work. And then you find that all of your decisions are short-term decisions, that your ability to think in any way strategically, it disappears, that in effect, you get stupider and stupider. Ryan Kemper writes, be wary of hero culture. Still, we should note that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I can't stand hearing that. As C.S. Lewis once wrote, actually, the road to hell is paved with bad intentions in any event. And we should note that a hero culture is very dangerous. Public figures such as Anthony Fauci, and Deborah Birx could certainly be described as heroes, but we need to avoid viewing them as infallible. Indeed, expressing a well-founded belief that contradicts a belief espoused by Fauci, who is, we feel, correctly beloved by the American people, is unfortunately met with hostility and often blind rage. There's also an irony here. Public figures such as, in no particular order, Fauci, Michael Osterholm, Bill Gates, and Sam Harris have been very vocal about worrying about the eventual possibility of a superbug. Imagine a pathogen that spreads like SARS-CoV-2 but kills like SARS-1 appeared to, or even one that wipes out the immune memory such as measles. These are very real possibilities, and we are right to be vigilant against the emergence of such a pathogen. But the measures we use to fight those pathogens need to be different from the measures we use against a virus like SARS-CoV-2, which is in the same ballpark, meaning within an order of magnitude, as influenza as far as mortality is concerned. It wrinkles my brain, as Donald Glover would say, to imagine that, yeah, super virus, got to be on the lookout for this super pathogen. So let's send American taxpayer money and French taxpayer money to a lab in Wuhan, China, to make deadlier bat corona viruses, because nothing has ever gone wrong in China. British doctors warn some Chinese ventilators could kill if used in hospitals. This is from NBC News. Senior British doctors have warned that 250 ventilators the United Kingdom bought from China risk causing significant patient harm, including death. The doctor said the machines had a problematic oxygen supply, could not be cleaned properly, had an unfamiliar design and a confusing instruction manual, and were built for use in ambulances, not hospitals. The British case is not an isolated one, and it comes as a stark example of a procurement problem that has plagued many countries as the coronavirus has spread throughout the world. So China gives us this disease, and then we pay money to stuff from China that doesn't work. Well, that certainly makes sense. So we're living in a nightmare. Could it get worse? Of course. You know, King Lear, it's not the worst so long as you can say this is the worst. But new nightmare news. This is from The Hill. Hillary Clinton continues to hover in the wings, ready to step forward should Joe Biden fail. Don't look now, but Joe is failing. Not only has his campaign been rocked by sexual assault allegations from one-time staffer Tara Reid, but the public is beginning to give up on the former vice president. A new Emerson College poll showed 57% of likely voters think President Trump will win election in November. Remember, establishment Democrats put forward Uncle Joe because he was the safe candidate bound to defeat Trump. Oops. I don't understand this. Oh, he's just Uncle Joe. He's such a lovable person. He lies about his academic qualifications. He's a plagiarist. He does not react well to any kind of criticism or questioning. This is not new. You know, him snapping at people and calling people fat and the like, and talking about how his IQ is higher than whoever he's talking to. These are not things that one associates with, I don't know, popular politicians. That's not the only problem that crops up in the Emerson poll. It also shows Trump supporters 19 points more enthusiastic about their candidate than Trump supporters. The enthusiasm gap will drive turnout this fall. Another red flag is Biden's tepid fundraising. According to the New York Times, Trump has a monster cash advantage of $187 million. As all of these issues cast doubt on Biden's prospects, the presumptive nominee must now fend off Tara Reid's allegations. None of this augurs well for the Biden campaign. One idea has been to convince Biden to step aside in favor of the very popular Michelle Obama, seen as a sure bet to beat Trump. So far, though, the former First Lady has reportedly rebuffed all invitations to enter the fray. That leaves Hillary Clinton. Biden could choose Clinton as his running mate and then step down before the election and allow Hillary to run in his place. Yeah, I just think, yeah, you're just going to have America's cities burn if that happens. Clinton is the only VP candidate who would be able to pull off such a last-minute switch. She has the team, the resources, and the experience, bad experience, as Trump said, to be the nominee. Senator Amy Klobuchar and former Georgia State Representative Stacey Abrams, pick me, and Senator Kamala Harris do not. Clinton is ready and eager. She is desperate to avenge her 2016 loss, which she still blames on Putin, and has pumped up her public profile to keep herself in consideration. In past months, she has conducted endless interviews, promoted the uber-flattering four-part Hulu film about herself, made headlines by attacking Bernie Sanders and Mark Zuckerberg, and fired unending broadsides against President Trump. How would Hillary stack up as a nominee this time around? Hillary certainly looks stronger and more fired up than Biden. She has the energy he lacks, well, for a few hours a day. She could count on President Obama to campaign for her, as Biden also can, and she would have ever-popular husband Bill helping out. Yeah, but we know that in 2016, Bill made some very sensible suggestions about going out in the American heartland, and Hillary's people told Bill to put a sock in it. We're not interested in political advice from you. You were only elected president twice. Bishop Schneider, who I mentioned earlier, says that coronavirus is causing a catacomb church to emerge, a kind of underground church. He said it could be that we're going through a time of the catacombs, a kind of underground church, but we needn't be fearful. We have to be courageous because the church has a lot of experience being a catacomb church. And in those times of catacombs, God gave plenty of spiritual fruit for the renewal of the church. Schneider pointed to the heavy-handed restriction placed on churches in the United Kingdom as elsewhere as proof that governments are using the coronavirus as a pretext to implicitly persecute the Catholic Church. England's lockdown laws are completely against every reasonableness of proportionality, he remarked. They are a kind of discrimination and persecution of the Church. The bishops and the bishop conferences and even the Holy See, that's the Vatican, should insist on the governments to give the churches at least the same rights as they give to the stores where people can buy food. If the government denies the church the same rights as they give to a store, then this is discrimination of religion. So I'm going to be moving to the Theater Thursday in a few minutes, but first let's check out the latest from Canada. Get the text numbers. 3,184 deaths. Again, there's 38 million people in Canada. 53,236 cases. Oh, in Saskatchewan, the number of confirmed cases has rocketed to 389, and the number of deaths has rocketed from 5 to 6. Again, Saskatchewan has 1.1 million people. 111 deaths in British Columbia, which is a population of 5.1 million, and 2,112 confirmed cases, which is obviously a very good reason for shutting down the entire province. But I should note, to be fair, it's much better here in British Columbia in terms of the lockdown, as opposed to, say, the far-right government of Ontario, the Conservative Party of Ontario. Evictions begin at Victoria Hotel being used for homeless sheltering. Evictions at the Travelodge on Gorge Road East in Victoria have begun. People are being told to leave so that homeless campers from Pandora Avenue and Topaz Park can be housed. U.S. officials announce 2 more COVID-19 deaths, 25 more cases. And where are we on the island? Vancouver Island, where I live. 120 cases of the virus in the island health region. Again, yeah, like I said, justifies a lockdown. John Carpe, who's leads the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms and is a very good man. He has written the medical officers for the province, territory, and nation with the questions about the costs of quarantine. He says the lockdowns and social isolation measures imposed by governments on citizens risk throwing millions of Canadians into unemployment, bankruptcy, or poverty, and in many cases, all three. Social isolation combined with unemployment and poverty predictably lead to numerous adverse health outcomes: depression, anxiety, alcoholism, other addictions, drug overdoses, mental illness, obesity, and suicides. I trust that Canada's chief medical officers have a broad-based and comprehensive concern about the health and lives of Canadians, one that extends to preventing deaths and adverse health outcomes regardless of their source or cause. And the Conservative caucus for Ontario voted to condemn an MP named Derek Sloan, who had accused Dr. Theresa Tam of her first loyalty not being to Canada. So the Conservative, let's see, he says that I did not and am not questioning Dr. Tam's loyalty to Canada. Sloan asked whether Tam was working for China or Canada because she has been parroting whatever the World Health Organization says. At the beginning, the World WHO line, which she parroted, was nothing to see here, move along, doesn't even transfer from person to person. It's outrageous to ban flights from certain regions because the real epidemic is xenophobia and stigmatization. And then, just like the WHO, she turned on a dime. Holding China accountable is in the Canadian moral and strategic interest, says Samantha Power, who has turned fiercely anti-PRC recently. The whole world has an interest in getting to the bottom of what's happened, she said on the CBC. It's not just in Canada's moral interest and in keeping with Canada's finest traditions, but also in its strategic interests. If China feels great impunity at a time like this, having locked up scientists and those who were warning of this pandemic, having not been transparent with the outside world with such life and death consequences, imagine how President Xi and the Chinese regime will take that to the bank. And, oh, yes. So we have confirmation now that United Front groups in Canada helped Beijing stockpile coronavirus safety supplies. In mid-January, consulates in Canada and worldwide issued an urgent call. China was concerned that the new coronavirus raging in Wuhan was so deadly and infectious that its nurses and doctors would run out of safety supplies. It needed personal protective equipment. In just 6 weeks, China imported 2.5 billion pieces of epidemic safety equipment, including over 2 billion safety masks, according to Chinese government data. And this raises big concerns on a number of fronts, say critics, including Conservative MP Erin O'Toole, who's running for the leadership of the Conservative Party. China was evidently hiding the extent of a pandemic that endangered the world while covertly securing PPE at low prices. This surreptitious operation left the world naked with no supply of PPE. And yes, United Front, and through clandestine United Front networks run out of Chinese consulates in cities from Vancouver to Toronto to New York to Melbourne to Tokyo, the Communist Party urged millions of overseas Chinese to bulk buy N95 masks in order to ship back batches of scarce supplies for the motherland. Yeah, I don't think that China is going to become popular in the West anytime soon. And the World Health Organization is balking at a Canadian Parliamentary Committee's request for key WHO advisor Bruce Aylward, who's a Canadian, to testify before MPs and explain the global body's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. I'll take a look at the chat before I move to Theatre Thursday in just a minute. Philip Daniel writes, Francesca Ramsey of MTV News did a video on how race is a social construct. She showed a map of blue and box races, and the Middle East was labeled as part of the Malay race. You may have heard that so-called BAME doctors and other medical personnel are being removed from British hospitals because apparently the coronavirus is a particular risk to them. I don't know how that could possibly be true, because as we know, that race is simply a social construct and all people are the same all over the world. Let's see, Eternal Fisherman says, some Georgians look more like Middle Easterners, others like whites. A lot of race talk in the chat. Metal Mike says, I'm voting for Derek Sloan. I don't know. I think it's quite likely that he's going to be kicked out of the caucus because he has attacked Theresa Tam, who is the best-loved person in Canada. Me Too says, hello, members of the regular chat. Has Kev covered the UK yet? If he's on Canada, yeah. That was a few minutes ago. So on to Theatre Thursday. And the movie I'm speaking about tonight is called La Science des Rêves, which means the science of dreams, but the version released outside France was called The Science of Sleep. I don't really understand the title change. Perhaps it was thought that The Science of Dreams sounded too clinical, or sounded too much like a documentary. But before I talk about the movie, I wanted to quote from Stuff White People Like. In putting together the canon of directors that white people like, and Michel Gondry is number 68 on the list, we must include Michel Gondry. He directed such white classics as Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, Science of Sleep, and Dave Chappelle's Block Party. Oh, that's right, Charlie Kaufman, Gael Garcia Bernal, and Dave Chappelle. Could it get any better for white people? Oh, yes, it can. You see, Michel Gondry got famous by directing videos for the White Stripes, Massive Attack, and Björk. These are three bands that, at some point in their lives, all white people have thought were cool. Between the ages of 16 to 20, all white people go through a phase where they aspire to become a music video director. Keep in mind, this was written in 2008. This is followed shortly by a phase where they want to become a regular director. But in both cases, they don't want to produce generic content, they want to create art. As a result, the two directors who have achieved this, Spike Jonze is the other, are universally beloved by white people. If you look at the DVD collection of a white person, even those without a TV, it will contain the work of director Michel Gondry, which I own myself. This can be used to help find common ground with white people. Talk about how you wanted to direct music videos after you saw Michel Gondry's video for Around the World by Daft Punk. Then make a joke about how foolish you were at that age and everyone will have a good laugh. But they will also feel your pain about sacrificing your artistic dreams. The observant among you will probably be aware that the white person wet dream Be Kind Rewind is about to be released. This might be the biggest event in white person film since the Royal Tenenbaums. I love the Royal Tenenbaums, Be Kind Rewind. I don't think it is as good as The Science of Sleep. The Science of Sleep, of course, is about the surrendering of artistic dreams. Michel Gondry was born in 1963, and he is a musician. He was a drummer in a band called Wee Wee. And on one of the extras on the collection, Michel Gondry video collection, you see him drumming with Booker T and the MGs, which must be a dream for any drummer. So, in some ways, it's good to be famous. He started making videos for his band, and then Björk liked one of them and wanted him to work with her. And they made many astounding videos. I suppose my favorite is Hyper Ballad. He also did Everlong for the Foo Fighters, which is an Evil Dead 2 parody, and it features the giant hand, which also features in The Science of Sleep. When Gondry was a young man, he had a recurring dream in which he had a gigantic hand. Some of the other videos that he made for that I just think are outstanding, the ones he did with the White Stripes, Fell in Love with a Girl, and its use of Legos, and Dead Leaves and The Dirty Ground. Come Into My World by Kylie Minogue it's rather technically amazing because you see a proliferation of Kylie Minogues, and you see these Kylies crossing each other's axis, which is not something that is supposed to be able to be possible. You see a similar thing, Gondry having fun with the audience in the video he made for Massive Attack called Protection, which appears to be one continuous shot, but you have the camera going up and down, diving through windows and down elevators, and it's not possible for this to be one continuous shot. But you look at it and you think, how did he achieve that? How did he do that? The Science of Sleep is written by, as well as directed by Michel Gondry, and it stars Gael Garcia Bernal, Charlotte Gainsbourg, Meow Meow, and Alain Chabat. Charlotte Gainsbourg is a very interesting woman. She is the daughter of Jane Birkin, who is the most beautiful woman in the world, and of Serge Gainsbourg, who was a very physically ugly man. Jane Birkin was a model and an actress, and she released an infamous top single with Serge Gainsbourg. Who was this? He was a songwriter, impresario, punster, provocateur. And Charlotte Gainsbourg, she has a musical career as well. And her first album was largely or his first album as an adult, called 555, was largely made by the French band Air, but Jarvis Cocker of Pulp and Neil Hannon of Divine Comedy also participated, and it was produced by Nigel Godrich, of course, who is the producer to the Artistic Stars. And her second record was written by Beck and produced by Beck. She is a chanteuse, would you say, a Sprechstimme, that style of singing. I find her work to be quite delightful. And of course, she appears in art films. I suppose the most famous of which is Lars von Trier's Antichrist. This movie, The Science of Sleep, is a very strange movie in many ways. One of which is that the movie is set in Paris, but most of the dialogue is in English. There is some French dialogue, and there's also a little Spanish dialogue. And our main character is called Stéphane Moreau, and he is just returned to Paris. His father has died in Mexico. He is half Mexican. And his mother wants him closer, and she offers him what was in effect his old apartment growing up. She owns 2 apartments. They're across from each other, and he occupies one. And as he finds out, his first journey to the apartment, that 2 young women live there. And one of them is brunette, Charlotte Gainsbourg, and the other one is a blonde, Zoe. And our hero, Stéphane, he's a handsome young man, but he is exceedingly socially awkward. And he is actually attracted to Zoe more than Stephanie. But, Stephanie, it's kind of like the magic flute. You think these 2 are going to be together. Stephanie is nowhere near as good-looking as Zoe, but she is a kind and intelligent person who takes an interest in Stéphane, and Stéphane becomes besotted with her. That Stéphane is an artist, and he has inventions, including many of which are fantastic. And there's obviously an open question about whether these inventions of his are actually real, or whether they are simply things that he dreamed about. Because Stéphane, he begins to suffer from narcolepsy in Paris, and the real world dissolves into his dream world, especially since his dream world is so much more attractive than the real world. And with regard to the way that dreams are depicted in The Science of Sleep, it's good, as opposed to stupid, like in that movie Inception. One of the things about dreams that I think that everyone knows is that dreams are entirely random. That, okay, here's a narrative, and then suddenly everything changes, or something outright stupid happens. And this is the sort of thing that Stéphane gets in his dreams. In his dreams, he is the star of a TV show, Stéphane TV, which is all about him and his life. And you see the art direction of the genius of Michel Gondry, that is very much a DIY aesthetic, with cameras, fake cameras, and being made of things that you would find just around the house, or cellophane being used to simulate water, that sort of thing. Just also with regard to dreams, he starts a job at a new company. A job has been procured for him. And immediately, Alain says, you have to choose between me and these other two, and he uses a word that begins with F that refers to homosexuals. And the man says, how can we be homosexuals if we're different sexes? But that sort of logic, it's not going to go anywhere with Alain. And the woman, Martine, she's played by Aurélia Petit, and despite her glasses, she's very sexy. But he makes no advances. Stefan makes no advances on her, but she features prominently in his dreams in a sexual way, because clearly, in his subconscious, he has realized, how attractive she is, and she's a girl in the office. Now, Stefan has been given the opinion that this is an artistic job, but it's just typesetting. That's all it is. And this is one of the things that leads Stefan further into the dream world, that he believed that he was going to have an outlet for a calendar which he had created, which is called Disasterology. And each month of the calendar would be illustrated, with a large illustration of some event which, in Stefan's opinion, characterized a particular culture. That that culture had been shaped by such a disaster. And the head of the firm says, no, we're not interested in that. The head of the firm seems to think that Stefan is, I don't know, an idiot or mentally retarded, or perhaps insane. Now, Stefan, he meets cute, as they say, with the two women across the hall, because he is coming up the stairs and a piano is being delivered to the apartment. And as one might imagine, it's an upright piano, but very heavy, and the two men bringing in lose control, and Stefan's hand is injured when it is crushed against the wall. And the two women, they take him in and they treat his wound. And for some reason, Stefan feels the necessity not to confess the fact that his mother owns the apartment that they're living in, and that he is actually living across the hall. Stephanie figures this out soon enough. And so in this state that Stefan is in, this narcoleptic state, he finds that he has written a note confessing his feelings about Stephanie, and then he manages to retrieve the note. He's naked, having come out of the bath, retrieve the note with a coat hanger, but Stephanie has already read it. Stefan he's a romantic about women. That, it seems fairly clear that Sexy Martine is interested in him, but he doesn't have these kind of romantic feelings for her. He is very much the opposite of Guy, who he likes sex, as much sex as he can get, with as many women as he can. And Stefan asks him about this. Why? Especially at your age. We see him in one of the scenes of the movie going to some sort of disco, and he's wearing a black leather jacket, with buttons, with slogans and band names on them. And Guy says, it's punk. Oh, well, yeah, that'll get all the 20-year-old women interested in him. But, he puts in the work, and if you put in the work, if you attempt to seduce enough women, eventually you are going to get one woman who says yes. This is Guy's strategy. So Guy explains that, in a few years, he'll be old and hideous and no women will be interested in him. And I'm going to swear here, so, you can fast forward or turn down the sound for a few seconds. But he says, when he's old, he will have the memory of the great fucks that he's had. And Stefan is bemused by this, and I was bemused by it myself. It always seems to be, it's pretty much the same. It's all of a piece. You know, I don't know that I could think of any single one. If I had to. But Guy thinks very much differently. Stefan is unhappy with his mother. She Her boyfriend is a magician of some sort. Stefan says that she's always falling for guru figures. That was after the divorce from her husband, Stefan's father. And Stefan is pushing this relationship with Stephanie, and Stephanie, she rejects him because of his immaturity, his irrationality. And he becomes bitter, as romantic men tend to do, when the objects of their affection do not respond in kind. And there's a painful scene where he uses a crude sexual epithet to talk to her, even saying, do you think that it is too late to get Zoe interested in me? But he is working on his inventions, particularly this Golden the Pony Boy, which is a kind of mechanical horse, which he wants to make real, to gallop like a real horse. The Disasterology calendar is actually made, or maybe it is, maybe it isn't, maybe he just dreams this. And it becomes a huge success. And there's a party thrown for him in his honor. And he makes an assignation with Stephanie, but as often happens in romantic films, that this doesn't come off, and she thinks she's been rejected, which is the last straw for her, and he decides that he's had enough of Paris, which I suppose he associates it with his father getting divorced, and he associates it with this great unhappiness, which his failed relationship with Stephanie has resulted in. There's a really a manic quality to this movie, which is quite appealing. I suppose white people like Michel Gondry, because he has a great imagination. There are any number of fantasy sequences, dream sequences in the movie, which are rather amazing, I must say. That he cuts himself with an old electric razor, and this used to be a real problem. They were bad. Electric razors were generally bad until recently. And he throws it, and it breaks. And later, he has a dream that the electric razor develops of a life of its own, and it goes across the floor like a snake, crawls down out of the building, and there is his boss. And the electric razor attacks his boss, which causes the man's hair, which was short, to grow very, very long, and his beard, which he didn't have, to grow very, very long. The invention in this movie is really, really impressive. And, I saw this movie in an art theater in Victoria in 2007, back when Victoria actually had an art theater. And I suppose the reason that I identify so closely with this movie is that Stefan is he's very much like me. And I really felt the anguish that he went through. The final scene of the movie, which I won't give away, is I found it to be overwhelming. And I went to the movie with one of my daughters, and I was so overwhelmed at the end of the movie that I had to turn my head so that she couldn't see. She couldn't see this. I thought it was rather embarrassing. Perhaps it was, perhaps it wasn't. But rewatching the film again just yesterday, I was overwhelmed by this. You know, there's certain assumptions made about men, young men in movies that that they're treated generically, that they're I don't know that they're crass and sex obsessed and the like. And a lot of young men are, but some aren't. And as I say, this was a movie that it speaks to me personally in a very strong way. And I have to say that the soundtrack is absolutely outstanding, as one would expect in a Michel Gondry film. That there's a Velvet Underground song, which is one of those things that one of those bands that white people like. After Hours, which is one of the very saddest Velvet Underground songs that Maureen Tucker sang. It has been given new words called "If You Rescue Me," and it is played by a band of course, Stefan on the drums and Iggy playing the stand-up bass, and the guitar played by Stefan's hapless co-worker, the male one. And they're dressed up as cats, because again, that is the sort of thing that one gets in dreams. There is a beautiful song with an astounding arrangement from, I think, 1976 by the Dutch singer-songwriter Dick Arnegaarn, called Coutances, which is a tourist town in northern France. It's just the glissandi on the string. It is audacious, to put it mildly. But this is one of my favorite films. I suppose it would be in my top 5. There's a lot of people who hate Michel Gondry. I suppose they hate him because of his imagination. There are a lot of people who go and see movies and what's happening here? Is this real? Is this not real? And it infuriates them. It doesn't infuriate me. Of course, there's a lot of people who hate Michel Gondry because he is, I don't know, sort of a hipster's darling. And so, if certain people like a certain thing, then there's, some people who reflexively hate it. Those are my thoughts about the science of sleep, which I think, for all its melancholy, is, you could say that it is life-affirming. Anyway, go back to the chat. Anyone else get constant ads on YouTube for a particular type of shaver, says Manfred von Thistlebaum. I don't see a lot of ads on YouTube, I guess. A smart razor that seeks to manscape whether you like it or not. Yeah, I suppose you could use any of these, the ones, I've got one from Schick and one from Gillette that I have used for cutting my hair. I suppose you could use it to deal with other hair on your body. Oh, the argument of whether Austrians are Germans or not popped up again. Eternal Fisherman says, Austria was still part of the German Union until 1866. They were and are absolutely, undoubtedly German. Yeah, I don't know about that. I really don't know about that. I mentioned the German film director who said that he was Bavarian. He did not like to think of himself as Germans, and he did not like Werner Herzog. He said, I'm a Bavarian, and I don't like Germans very much. Obviously, you see tremendous differences in the personality and in culture in Germany. The further south you move, the more different it becomes. And of course, an enormous difference in Germany between that part of Germany, the Rhineland, which was conquered by Rome, and of course, Austria was conquered by Rome, and those parts of Germany which were not conquered by Rome, and which in fact were not Christianized until the very late Middle Ages. Anyway, someone mentions Hitler being from Austria. Yes, I like to call him history's worst immigrant. Worst immigrant ever. That's the show for tonight. I want to thank you all for tuning in. Tomorrow is the book club, and I will be discussing Woody Allen's memoir, which is called Apropos of Nothing. And if you like the show, any part of it, I would appreciate it if you click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not previously. If you'd like to support the show, my PayPal address is kevin_grace@hotmail.com. I'll be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific time, 7 p.m. Eastern, and I will leave you with my traditional benediction and farewell, that in these totally atomized times, I hope that you all manage to find some sort of human contact. Good night.